Welcome back, America. I would be extremely surprised if Tom Cotton has ever been to a Jimmy Buffett concert. Senator Cotton, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. It's good to be on with you. I cannot say that I ever have been to one, but yeah, America lost two great Americans over the weekend, Jimmy Buffett and Bill Richardson. So my thoughts and prayers go out to their families and loved ones.
I agree on both counts. I want to ask you, Senator, about President Biden. The big story of the day, I was talking about this with Brett Baer, is the Wall Street Journal poll that shows 73% of registered voters, including 66% of registered Democrats, believe that President Biden is too old to seek a second term. First question: have you sat down in a meeting with the president in the last year?
Well, Hugh, before I get to your question, let me just say that 73% of American voters are correct, and I'm not sure what 27% might be thinking. It won't surprise you to know that my invitation to the White House so far has been lost in the mail, but I have spoken to numerous senators, both Democrats and Republicans, who have been in meetings with the president and who knew him when he was vice president or senator, and they say that he has definitely lost more than a step, as anyone who can see when he speaks in public, often seems confused about where he is or what he's doing, or he makes significant consequential mistakes like blurting out that U.S. policy is regime change in Russia as we try to help Ukraine take its territory, or 4 times in 13 months, seeming to reverse our policy towards Taiwan, only to have his staff walk it back in a matter of hours. So that poll, although there's a lot of people talking, should not be surprising to anyone who can see with their own 2 eyes Joe Biden's decline over the years. He's just too old to be president, certainly to have a second term.
Now, I know that a lot of Democrats don't like to speak ill of their party's nominee, but you've got friends in the Senate, and I say friends loosely. I mean colleagues like Sherrod Brown and John Tester and Bob Casey Jr. and Joe Manchin, and there are others who have to run for reelection in a year and a half. They have got to be worried that even if the former President Trump is the nominee, that Democrats are just not going to turn out to vote for a guy who is manifestly not equipped to be commander in chief. Have any of them confided that to you?
I'm sure they're all quite worried about it. I mean, you saw this in 2020 as well. The Democrats were expecting to win 6, 7, 8 Senate seats, and they did not have anywhere near that gain because Democratic enthusiasm for Joe Biden is low, and Republican enthusiasm for President Trump at the time was very high as well. So I'm sure many Democrats are worried not just about losing the White House, but also about losing control of the Senate or losing in an even bigger margin in the House of Representatives. I mean, that's one reason why they continue to concoct more and more far-fetched schemes to try to beat the former president if he is our nominee.
All right.
They were worried. They were worried that the polling earlier this year showed that he was running even or slightly ahead of Donald Trump. So they rolled out 4 indictments. Now the indictments don't seem to have made much of a difference, and Donald Trump is still running even with Joe Biden. So what do? Now they're concocting this crazy scheme that somehow the 14th Amendment disqualifies Donald Trump from even being on the ballot. And what's worse, they are proposing that you put that decision in the hands of partisan Democrats, like the Secretary of State in a state like Michigan, to unilaterally remove the leading candidate of the opposition party from the ballot. For the people who claim that they are always on the lookout for our democracy, almost nothing could be more undemocratic.
I find that so absurd because the 14th Amendment, any even minor originalist, not like capital O originalist, but anyone who pays attention, knows that that was intended to disqualify former Confederates from running for office in the Union after the Union was restored. It's got nothing to do with today. And I know they found 2 conservative scholars who wanted to make a name for themselves, and so they wrote it up. And I know that my friend Mike Ludig agreed with Lawrence Tribe that it works. No, it doesn't. It's absurd. And I'm not going to spend any time on that argument. I do want to ask you about Merrick Garland. You're on Judiciary. I don't know what happened to Robert Hur, the special counsel investigating the documents that President Biden had all over the place. And I do not know what is going on with Jack Smith. But Merrick Garland can provide us some answers. Has he got a date before the Judiciary Committee?
Well, certainly not in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Hugh, because Dick Durbin controls the schedule, and Dick Durbin would do nothing to undermine Joe Biden or to diminish the protection that Senate Democrats and the media have undertaken for the president and his son and his extended family members, and the way they were obviously trading influence on the president's office. We now know for 50 years, not just up to the time he was vice president, but while he was vice president and probably while he's president still. So, no, of course, Merrick Garland is not going to be appearing anytime soon in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Now, I can't speak to the House Judiciary Committee. I hope he will, and I hope you'll see a contrast between the kid gloves treatment with Hunter Biden trying to sneak a sweetheart plea deal by a judge in Delaware that failed because they couldn't defend its own terms in the light of day versus absolute radio silence on the investigation into Joe Biden's and his very similar conduct to Donald Trump, conduct that's already resulted in indictment for the former president, but nothing at all for the current president.
Does the appropriations process require the Attorney General to show up and defend the department? You know, it used to be that during the appropriations process, every head of every major department had to show up in front of the Appropriations Committee to defend their appropriations. Does that still hold?
It does, Hugh. It's not, I'm not on the Appropriations Committee, so their schedule's not front of mind for me, but typically those hearings happen in the spring, in March, April, and May. So I suspect he's already appeared in front of the Appropriations Committee for that purpose, but I hope he appears soon in front of one of the House committees and answers for these questions.
Now, Congressman Roy has been adamant that he's not afraid of a shutdown. Neither am I, provided that there's a goal that is defined and attainable when the government shuts down. When you have an amorphous shutdown, Republicans always lose. If you want something and you get it, you win. If you want something and you don't get it, and it goes on a long time, you still win. In this case, it might be a border wall. What is the general strategic approach among the Senate Republican caucus to the shutdown?
Well, Hugh, we're just back today in session, voting later today after a month at home. So I'll look forward to hear what my colleagues have heard from all of their voters back home. One thing I've consistently heard is concern not just about the economy, but about immigration, specifically the border, as you suggest. Now, as Speaker McCarthy and Senator McConnell have both indicated, we do expect a short-term stopgap funding measure. We're only, 25 days away and many fewer legislative days than that from the end of government funding this year. We probably need a little bit more time, but I think something like increased funding for border security and address towards the needs of closing the border, not towards just expediting the crossing of illegal migrants in this country, is something that could unify a lot of Republicans. And frankly, you might see support from some Democrats as well if you see the growing concern among Democratic mayors and governors about having a tiny, tiny fraction of these migrants bust to their states and their cities.
You know, the arrest numbers went through the roof, and a lot of people said, see, they're doing enforcement, but it's arrest and release, isn't it? We're not holding these people.
Yeah, of course. This is all catch and release. And remember, Hugh, this is just the people that didn't run away from the Border Patrol. They ran to the Border Patrol because they know if they utter a few magic words about supposed persecution, which is really not happening in Latin America, that they'll get it to enter the border. It doesn't even account for all the people who actually did run away from the Border Patrol, those who were trafficking young girls or boys into the country, those who were smuggling fentanyl into the country. It is a disaster at our border. The numbers continue to go up, which belie the Biden administration's claims a few months ago that they had gotten the border under control. Nothing could be farther from the truth. So
if there was a short-term deal, you would suggest that they secure border fence funding in exchange for a short-term deal, not only a long-term deal. You would suggest that'd be a minimum for the short term.
So, Hugh, I would want to examine the proposal very carefully because one thing we've seen with the Biden administration is that they will stretch to the point of breaking any statutory language that violates their preferred methods. So it's one thing to tell the Biden administration, here's some money to build on a wall. It's another thing to actually get the wall built. So I would want to scrutinize any particular language carefully before committing to it. I'd also want to consider whether in the short term there are things that can be more effective than trying to build a wall, which obviously will take a matter of months. For instance, implementing immediate changes to the policies for so-called humanitarian parole, which the administration has been abusing, or changing the policies for asylum seekers, which they've been abusing. So it's something I think, again, the goal could rally Republicans and maybe even some Democrats whose states and cities have begun to buckle under the strain of just a fraction of the migrants crossing the country. But I'd want to examine the best ends to achieve that goal.
Last question, Senator, and I have been assured by Leader McConnell's staff he's fine, he's back, he's at work, and I have no reason to believe other than that. Is that your understanding if you talk to the leader?
Yeah, it is my understanding. We've been in communication with each other over the last week. And I just want to point out, too, the gross double standard you see in the liberal media's treatment of Senator McConnell, who's still recovering from a pretty serious fall and concussion in the spring. And the New York Times, for instance, will go out and talk to lots of doctors who admittedly have done nothing to care for Senator McConnell or seen nothing beyond what we've all seen on television. And the New York Times will run that on its front page. By contrast, they treat Joe Biden and his obvious mental, cognitive, physical decline like a phalanx of bodyguards. And if you even suggest that someone watching on television could diagnose it, even if they're a medical specialist, the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN will come down on you like a ton of bricks. So I've noticed that these armchair doctors only seem to want diagnoses when the target is a Republican, not a Democrat.
Yeah, no, I got to say, 73% is a big number, Senator. If 73% say that Joe Biden is too old, that means he's too old. I think actually we could nominate anybody will beat Joe Biden at that number if they are capable of doing the job of commander-in-chief, because everyone has 9/11 in the back of their head. If 9/11 happens on Joe Biden's watch, I'm not sure he would know what to do.
Yeah, and Hugh, I think, the Democrats are kind of locked into this Faustian bargain they made in 2020 of nominating a man who even then was obviously too old to be president and has declined since then, and then chose as his vice president Kamala Harris, who can only be seen as a kind of 25th Amendment insurance, that if you had just a normal, competent Democratic politician as vice president, I think the calls for the cabinet to remove Joe Biden as president would have already been very loud. But with Kamala Harris as vice president, probably the only Democratic politician less popular than Joe Biden obtained and is still benefiting from 25th Amendment insurance.
Hey, quick question. On Friday night, Brett Baer did a new candidate casino. We had to bet $100 on whether or not Biden would be the president. I did $90 that he wouldn't be. How would you make that the nominee, Senator? Would you bet 90, or would you be with Byron York and say he's going to be the nominee?
Hugh, I'm not going to be a gambling man on this one, but I'd say that I think you were smart to go long on that question.
All right. Good. Glad to hear it, Senator Cotton. Always a pleasure to talk to you, especially when you're agreeing with me. I much prefer that. That's why we didn't talk about the Browns. Stay tuned, America. I'll be right back with Josh Kroshauer. Stay tuned.